My name's Peter Pham. I'm a human rights lawyer from my arts method, and I want to talk to you today about an issue that is affecting many people in Southeast Queensland. And I've been assisting a few groups from Southeast Queensland with this issue for quite a few months now. And this is the National Fire Ant Eradication Program, which is a program being run by the Department of the Environment, Science and Innovation in Southeast Queensland, where they've detected fire ants in the area and they've drawn a line around a particular area in Southeast Queensland. And they're using a concoction of chemicals which is designed to stifle the fertility of female fire ants to try to eradicate fire ants completely. The problem is that there has been insufficient testing done on the chemicals that are being used on fire ants, and in particular on the effect of those chemicals on the land itself, on animals, on fauna, and also on human beings and on people. And independent testing has been done in more than one instance, which has shown that these chemicals are having a detrimental impact on the land, on animals, and on waterways in particular. And there are now hundreds of anecdotes of individuals in Southeast Queensland who are complaining that their health has been affected, their animals have been affected, the land that they're living on has been affected, the biodiversity of the area has been affected. And even the department themselves have admitted that they've made mistakes and contaminated particular areas of the land. And I'll show you an example of that just to start things off. So this is a post that was put up on social media by the department where they say they're going to do some spraying in Samford. And this was just on this past weekend. And to sort of allay everyone's concerns, they say the department has completed its investigation into the accidental dispersal of fire ant eradication treatment into local waters in Samford in May 2024. It was determined that the accidental dispersal was not compliant with the Environmental Protection Act. However, the department is satisfied that they've adjusted their processes and procedures to reduce the likelihood of recurrence. Of course, they don't go into any depth about what those procedures and processes are, nor do they release any kind of data to evidence the fact that the water has not been contaminated. On that note, I'll just show you one of the independent tests that some people have attained from this company, Glorious Water, who are water quality specialists. They found, and this was in June, that the water tested from samples collected and supplied indicated that there is the presence of the chemical, one of the active compounds, in two of the samples analyzed by an independent laboratory. Now, if we go to the outcome, the conclusion, the presence of pyriproxyfen at high concentrations in Dawson Creek raises significant environmental concerns, necessitating immediate investigation and mitigation measures to prevent further contamination. Regular monitoring and stricter regulation of pesticide use near water bodies are essential to protect aquatic ecosystems. Methylprednisolone levels in the tested samples were below detectable limits, suggesting that that compound is not a current concern. But if we look at what this chemical actually is, it's an insect growth regulator that acts as a larvicide against public health insect pests. So this is what they're using to try to curb the fire ant populations. Problem is, it's not supposed to get into the waterways, and there are regulations around where these chemicals are supposed to be used, because obviously if it affects the fire ants, it's going to affect other life as well, including human beings. Now, I want to show you a little bit of the Environmental Protection Act, because that act is one of the acts which governs the way that the environment is supposed to be treated and protected, particularly in Queensland. This is the Queensland version of the Act that I'm going to show you. So I'll just share my screen this time. And if you look at this piece of legislation here, you'll see the Environmental Protection Act in Queensland. Now, the most important part of this act that I want to show you is the object of the act, which very clearly states that the whole point of the act is to protect Queensland's environment while still allowing for development. But the principle of environmental protection that's emphasized is the precautionary principle. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and show you something else, which is the definition of the precautionary principle and what it actually is. So if we look at this screen here, and this is the definition that the Act actually directs us to. And the precautionary principle says, where there are threats of serious or irreversible environmental damage, lack of full scientific certainty should not be used as a reason for postponing measures to prevent environmental degradation. In the application of the precautionary principle, public and private decisions should be guided by careful evaluation to avoid, wherever practicable, serious or irreversible damage to the environment, and an assessment of the risk-weighted consequences of various options. Now, the department has not done the people of Queensland the privilege or the favour, or indeed their duty, which is to actually evidence the basis upon which they say that they're not endangering the people of Southeast Queensland, the animals of the people of Southeast Queensland, the biodiversity of Southeast Queensland. They're not really releasing any of that evidence or data. They're not being transparent at all. Individuals who are complaining to the department, quite rightly so, saying, I'm concerned about my personal health. I felt this impact. Here's a letter from my doctor, which shows that I've been adversely affected by the chemicals that are being sprayed, often by helicopters on my property, are being ignored, dismissed, gaslit, and the department is not complying with its duties under the EPA. Now, the Act that's actually authorising this program, like most large-scale programs that are aimed at dealing with some kind of biosecurity problem, is the Biosecurity Act. The Biosecurity Act doesn't allow authorised officers to access people's property without any kind of explanation or accountability. People have the right to resist biosecurity officers coming onto their property if it's reasonable for them to resist to them. And I'm going to show you one more thing, which is a letter that we sent to the Commissioner of Police in Queensland about a week ago now, which they've acknowledged receipt of and assured us that they're going to respond to. So that's the water test. This is the letter that we sent. And we noted that Section 336 of the Biosecurity Act outlines the offence of obstructing a biosecurity officer and provides for certain exceptions based on a reasonable excuse. Now, the reason we're pointing to this section is because people are having biosecurity officers attend their property, and those biosecurity officers are saying, you don't have a choice but to let us come onto your land and spray your land to get rid of fire ants. Well, that's not exactly what the Biosecurity Act says. The Biosecurity Act does create an offence of obstructing a biosecurity officer, but there's an exception. And one of those exceptions is if you have a reasonable excuse. So what we've done is we've asked the Commissioner of Police, well, how would you interpret what a reasonable excuse is? Because it's one thing to look at what a reasonable excuse is often considered to be by the courts, but it's the police who are attending with biosecurity officers at the moment, particularly when it comes to people who are asking very reasonable questions of those biosecurity officers. And we want the Commissioner of Police in Queensland to come forward and clarify for the community what constitutes a reasonable excuse in his opinion. So that's Mr. Steve Golczewski, the current Commissioner of Police. You know, here's some examples of the questions that we asked. How does the Queensland Police Service interpret what constitutes a reasonable excuse? You know, would they consider a medical certificate provided by a medical professional referring to harm suffered as a result of or in relation to the program to constitute a reasonable excuse? I would suggest, and this is just my general opinion, that that is reasonable. I think most people would consider that if somebody has a doctor saying that they're actually suffering a health condition as a result of chemicals used by the program, it's reasonable for that person to resist officers of the department coming onto their property and spraying those chemicals, which may put them in harm's way. Is it a reasonable excuse to seek legal advice before allowing biosecurity officers onto your property? Is it a reasonable excuse to seek advice from an environmental specialist as to the potential impact of the project and the chemicals used as a part of the project, particularly given that the department has already admitted to making mistakes about where they've administered chemicals, and they've admitted to the potential for those chemicals to cause harm? Would you consider a citizen seeking confirmation from attending officers that if they were to suffer harm as a result of the project and the chemicals used as part of the project, that they were compensated for that harm, a reasonable excuse? So we're hoping to get an answer from the Commissioner of Police pretty soon. We think that this is an issue that is very reasonably concerning a lot of Queenslanders, and it's also an issue in New South Wales as well, in northern New South Wales, but particularly in southeast Queensland, where the Biosecurity Act is a little bit more onerous and seems to give authorised officers a little bit more power than the New South Wales Act does, which does have more checks and balances in it. It's still the case that individuals in southeast Queensland have some protection, and that is that there is such thing as a reasonable excuse to stop a biosecurity officer accessing your property. And I would encourage people to seek individual legal advice if they're in a situation where biosecurity officers are trying to access their property and they don't want those biosecurity officers to access their property. So I wish everybody a good afternoon, and we'll talk soon.